Suribachi. But it changed the whole attitude of the whole thing. It absolutely did something to us.
From the exhibit space inside the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, we're joined now by Marine Corps History Chief Edward Nevgloski and Museum Curator Owen Connor. Mr. Connor, first on this eve of the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima, explain why there are two historic flags in that hallway that you're sitting in right now.
Well, we wanted to take the opportunity to make sure the folks had the chance to see both the flags that were lifted over Mount Suribachi. It's not something we generally do all the time due to gallery considerations, but since it is the anniversary, and we want 75th in particular, we wanted to make the effort to give people this opportunity to see them. As we talk at the museum, both flags are important to the Marine Corps. As a historian, I often talk that the first flag is the most important flag for the veterans themselves who were actually at the battle and saw it lifted. The second flag is America's first major media sensation. It's an iconic moment. So when you have both flags out, there's two different stories that we can certainly tell.
That first flag, a smaller flag, explain how it went up and when the change happened, and how far into the Battle of Iwo Jima did this all take place?
Well, it was shortly after the Marines had landed on the 19th of February. They immediately, sort of a three-pronged attack through the island, but they wanted to isolate Mount Suribachi. And when Suribachi was isolated, they sent a patrol. Lieutenant Harold Schreier and his men went up to the top of Suribachi, sort of not knowing what to find. But when they reached the summit, they wanted to let everyone know that they'd sort of cleared the peak, and they planted the first flag on the island. This flag was a smaller flag. It wasn't large enough to be seen, so Marines immediately decided to put a larger flag up on the Mount Suribachi, and so they could see it from shore. But there's lots of iconic stories. We've heard numerous veterans telling us the moment that they saw the flag go up. You heard, ships out surrounding the island honking their horns. You saw, Marines cheering. And humorously, a lot of veterans that we've spoken to pointed out that they were busy trying not to be killed during the battle and kept their heads down. So you get a lot of great stories from when the flag first went up.
And we heard one of those stories from Woody Williams in the lead-in to this segment. You're sitting next to Edward Nevgloski, the Marine Corps History Chief there at the museum. Mr. Nevgloski, how much longer did the battle go on after the flag was raised over Mount Suribachi, and why did this moment become the moment that symbolizes the Marine Corps, so much so that it is the moment that's represented in the Marine Corps statue in Arlington, Virginia?
Yeah, the battle will rage on for another month, and that'll entail, hundreds, thousands of casualties. The flag raising at the outset of the battle, and it's at a time where the Marine Corps is taking a significant number of casualties, about on par of what the estimates had dictated. But there was also a sense of morale and continuing to press, and the flag raising represents that. For the Marines that did see the flag raised, for the sailors that were out at sea, it was symbolic in that the fight has just begun. It's going to continue together as a team, as a nation. This island can be seized. So it unceremoniously, in some ways, became almost a calling charge, if you will. And it was something that motivated the Marines and continued to resonate in their minds as they pushed on for another month.
And tomorrow is the 75th anniversary of the start of the Battle of Iwo Jima, the landings beginning February 19th of 1945, lasting 36 days, 26,000 American casualties, including nearly 7,000 dead. Of the 20,000 Japanese defenders, only 1,100 survived the battle. Some 27 medals of honor awarded for actions taking place during the battle. It's our topic as we focus on the National Museum of the Marine Corps this morning in this stop of our museum's tour, as we're focusing on the Battle of Iwo Jima, asking viewers to call in as well on special phone lines split up Regionally, if you're in the Eastern or Central time zones, 202-748-8000. If you're in the Mountain or Pacific time zones, 202-748-8001. And a special line for Marines and Marine family members, 202-748-8002. You can go ahead and start calling in now as we show you some of the scenery of the museum. Owen Connor is one of the gallery curators at that museum. Can you explain how the raising of the flag over Mount Suribachi is incorporated into the DNA of the museum that you're sitting in?
Well, the second flag, when Rosenthal snaps the image, my talk that I do for the museum, I often emphasize it really is this iconic media moment. You know, early in the war, we would send correspondents to the Pacific, and it could take weeks, months for things to get back. But when it comes to the flag photo being taken, it's literally from the battlefield to the front pages of America within about 2 days, given the International Dateline Times. So it's really a kind of iconic moment, almost a viral moment. It's ingrained in the museum, I mean, and from the architecture that you see, and from the way it's traveled through time. I always say that, you know, it sort of takes on bigger meaning even than within the Marine Corps. It symbolizes victory in World War II. It came at the right time. You know, Patton's tanks are rolling across Germany. The Allies are winning in Europe. And then there's this image that comes from Mount Suribachi. It shows Americans united in victory, and you know, it's all pulling together in this harmonious effort. But it's really ingrained in everything the Marine Corps does, because that moment captures, you know, just the spirit of our country. It captures the Marine Corps mentality of the war. It's just such a beautiful artistic image that sort of rises above the moment.
Mr. Nevgloski, there were some 110,000 Americans who participated in the Battle of Iwo Jima. How many of those were Marines?
So the estimates are in the range of between 70,000 and 80,000. Now that's the initial landing, and then of course post D-Day landings, and then reinforcements that'll come in later. Typically we look at roughly 74,000 to 75,000 Marines will touch the ground, and that includes the Navy corpsmen that are along with them. In addition to that, U.S. Army soldiers that were supporting us.
What was the strategic importance of the battle, and considering the losses that we talked about already, could the island have been bypassed in the larger war effort?
It's a good question. So the importance of Iwo Jima is you have to understand the larger picture. When you think of the campaign in the Pacific with the Marines and the Navy, and then of course the United States writ large, the Allies, it's all about logistics. It's all about getting enough combat power, and what I mean by combat power is your forces, your equipment, your firepower, your beams, bullets, and band-aids, if you will. The Pacific is a very, very large theater. You have to build up enough power, combat power, for the ultimate objective, which is mainland Japan, and the complete capitulation of the Japanese forces. In order to do that, the Allies are going to have to make a slow, methodical approach, seizing key strategic islands along the way. And then, of course, as that's occurring, we have to pick and choose these islands based on what those islands present to us. Do they have ports where ships can anchor and offload? Do they have pre-constructed facilities that the Marines could just move in and take over? Airfields, for example. As we get closer to mainland Japan, Iwo Jima is that defense, that fortress in the middle of the Pacific that's going to stop our aircraft from delivering ordnance on mainland Japan. If we can seize Iwo Jima, we can save, we believe, hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of aircraft. So the key is to think of it logistically, and then what Iwo Jima represents to our ability to seize the mainland.
Mr. Nevgloski, considering the force brought by the Americans when they landed there, what was the Japanese goal? Did they ever think they could actually win that fight?
The Japanese forces believed early on, when they started to develop the defenses on Iwo Jima, that there was a chance that they could delay us and potentially defeat us. as the war lingers on, the belief is that the Japanese probably won't have the industrial power, the industrial might to hold us off. So it goes from a defense and delay to an attrition-style defense. Iwo Jima, the defenses there are built 28 years earlier, and they continue to be improved with each passing year. By time the leader of the Japanese force, Kuribayashi, gets to Iwo Jima, he essentially knows that this is the last stand. Japan's not going to be able to hold out. So the idea is to kill as many Americans as he can, with the potential to delay, but knowing that in the end, that's going to be his final resting place.
Live from the National Museum of the Marine Corps, we're joined by Edward Nevgloski, Marine Corps History Chief, Owen Connor, World War II Gallery Curator, taking your phone calls. And we do have that special line for Marines and family members. 202-748-8002 is that number. And calling from Arlington, Virginia, the home of that Marine Corps Memorial, Jessica, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say that I so much appreciate the work of the Marine Corps in trying to educate the public about the war in the Pacific. I don't think the public is aware of the war in the Pacific as much as the other areas that saw battle throughout the world. So I'm very appreciative of that. And we'll be thinking of the people that sacrificed their lives this week while the acknowledgement of Iwo Jima is being recognized. My dad was in the Pacific as a Marine Scout bomber, and he survived. But all that said, thank you so much, and good luck.
As we noted, the 75th anniversary of the beginnings of the landings at Iwo Jima begin tomorrow. Mr. Connor, what's going to be happening at the museum there throughout these days, the 75th anniversary?
Well, we're really excited. The 22nd and 23rd, we're going to be showing large numbers of artifacts from the battle, sort of highlighting what we've really collected since we've opened in 2006. From my own personal collection that I curate here, we're highlighting particularly the Valor medals and sort of the sacrifice of the personal stories of the Marines involved. One of the things that I've noticed is we've collected here, we try to document the stories of each individual as much as the battle itself. And there's sort of a trend that evolves over in World War II with the Marine Corps, particularly by war's end. You start realizing that we're running out of men to fight these battles, and the number of medals that we have, you start seeing sort of trends where they're either 17-year-old enlistees, 18, 19-year-old young Marines, or they're later Marines who were drafted who were family men in their 30s. So by far the number of casualties you start seeing reflected in these medals that we'll be displaying, sort of reflect this and really the human toll that it's occurring. I think with this greatest generation in World War II, we're so focused on Americans' pride in what we accomplished. But we also have to understand that these are real people, and they're Marines that that all gave up something that lost on this battle. That sort of really there's a human toll to it, and we had our limits as a country, and this is something we want to highlight, those individual stories and faces this weekend.
Mr. Nevgloski, one of the individuals that our viewers just saw from one of the cases in your exhibit space was the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross of John Basilone. Who's John Basilone?
John Basilone is a renowned Marine. I think any U.S. Marine, especially those who have touched a machine gun, knows about Manila John from the time you enter the Marine Corps, all the way until your last breath. John Basilone will receive the Medal of Honor as a machine gun squad leader during the Battle for Guadalcanal. He'll depart the theater and go back as part of the bond drive, and then later on, while he's an instructor out at Camp Pendleton teaching future Marine machine gunners, he'll return to the fight, return to the Pacific Theater, and he'll land on Iwo Jima, and he'll be killed and awarded the Navy Cross. What's interesting is a lot of the Marines that he trained back in Camp Pendleton, California, before coming back to the Pacific and then landing on Iwo Jima, were the Marines that he was killed with months later.
We mentioned before that some 27 Medals of Honor were given out for actions on Iwo Jima. How many of the individuals who received those 27 medals made it off that island alive?
Oh, 13 were killed. So do the math, historians. As historians, math isn't our strong suit, but of the 27, 13 or 14 were posthumous awards to the Marines. So definitely, 27 just for one battle alone sort of speaks to the volume. We were speaking just the savagery of the conflict. Of 24 battalion commanders, 14 were wounded or killed in action. So the uncommon valors the common virtue certainly is not hollow words. It's absolutely the truth.
Absolutely. And one of those battalion commanders, Lieutenant Colonel Chambers, will receive the Medal of Honor, one of the more popular stories. And the Medal of Honor at Iwo Jima consumes 80% of the medals of honor that are going to be received by the Marine Corps during the war. So when you consider those staggering numbers, aside from the casualties, it's amazing at the ferocity of the fight and just the absolute heroism. And these are the stories that we know about. The stories that we don't know, the things that happened that remain between those Marines, the eyewitnesses. There's probably 27 more Medals of Honor that we just don't know about.
Staying on that line for Marines and family members, this is John out of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Good morning, John.
Good morning. I want to thank you all for having this on today. Very special for us and our family. We were a five-star family in World War II. We had Navy and Marines at Iwo. My grandfather, Thomas Hines, was wounded by a sniper day 5 and luckily survived. And but I just want to really say thank you from multiple generation Marines that we really appreciate it.
John, thank you for the call.
Thank you and your family.
Mr. Nevgloski, what does a five-star family mean?
The five-star family, so you've got family members that are in theater fighting, participating in the conflict. So that would be 5 family members that were there. And then, of course, the Gold Star if one of those family members is killed. So to see a flag in a window, which is what most Americans did at the time, a small flag that would be displayed in the window of their house, and for each service member that was deployed in theater participating in the war, there was a star. So that's a significant contribution from that family.
John is on that line for Marines and family members from Illinois. Good morning.
Hi, this is John from Hegwish. My dad was on Iwo Jima. I was a Marine in Vietnam. Going through old newspaper articles that my mom saved. My dad's been dead for 40 years. I'm going through newspaper articles, and here's an article that my mom saved from 1944, 45, I guess it's 45, and it's an article that says, my dad, Vic Yurnowski, got the Purple Heart on Iwo Jima. Within that article, it also mentions a fella from another neighborhood of Chicago, the neighborhood of Beverly, and it's a fella named McCarthy. I'm almost certain it's McCarthy, and he got the Medal of Honor. But it's an old, yellow piece of newspaper article. Hey, Ski, can you recall a fella named McCarthy getting the Medal of Honor on Iwo Jima? And every jarhead out there, go visit that museum in Quantico. I was there for the dedication, and it's such a gorgeous place. All of the jarheads got to go see it. Hey, God bless America today, and hoorah for jarheads.
John, thanks for the call. Mr. Nevgloski, to you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, right off the bat, there is McCarthy receives a Medal of Honor. I'm not sure if it's this particular one, but I'll certainly look into it. There are, and I really appreciate the fact that the gentleman calls me Ski. That is such a Marine Corps thing. If your last name ends in SKI and you are a Marine, There's no question about it. You're known as Ski. But I will certainly look into that. I don't have that available offhand, but appreciate the question.
Mr. Nevgloski, the Marine Corps History Chief. Owen Connor is the World War II Gallery Curator at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, joining us this morning in this special edition of the Washington Journal, brought to you by the Washington Journal and American History TV as we explore D.C. area museums and the American story. Mr. Connor, to you, sir, coming back to the exhibit and what you have there specifically related to Iwo Jima, I want to talk about a picture of some glasses and pens and a brush that are in a case there. Can you tell the story specifically of those glasses?
Yeah. Well, as a curator, we're always collecting the personal stories, and they're objects that Marines gathered that sort of, meant something to them in the battle. But it also gives us the opportunity to talk about the Marine themselves and sort of the characters. And one of the characters that who was a donor to the museum in 2006 was William Odom. He was better known to his friends as Wild Bill from Bougainville, and he was a young Marine. He'd enlisted at 19, and he'd been previously wounded in the Battle of Saipan. When he fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima, he had gathered specific artifacts that meant something to him, and some of these were captured Japanese personal effects. But when he donated them, he wanted to tell us the story about how even at the worst and darkest of times, Marines could find a dark humor in the event. Bill would told me the story about with these glasses, they labeled them Tojo's glasses. And when the Marines were pinned down in the action that day, he and a few of his friends sort of entertained themselves waving the glasses over the berm at the Japanese snipers that were taking fire at them. As he related the story rather humorously, by the end of the day, they'd spent most of the day pinned down. A young Southerner had crawled up to their position and was looking for some heroism, and he decided he could take out the Japanese sniper. But Bill and his friends pummeled the young Marine quickly and told him not to fire, which caused the Marine some confusion. Bill related as the NCO that if they shot the sniper, they were just going to replace him with somebody who might actually be able to hit something. So the Marines should be happy and thankful that they had Tojo's glasses and could keep them, themselves alive for the day just a little bit longer. And I always thought that was such a wonderful story and the kind of thing we're always looking to see for Marines and their history. So,
how much of your collection comes from donated items, and is it something that continues to grow, especially now as we're getting to a time where we're losing so many World War II veterans?
No, absolutely, and that's the thing that means so much to me as a curator for the 75th anniversary. People see this wonderful museum and they expected that the Marine Corps has always been collecting these things. But really, we opened in 2006, and this has made such a wonderful, given such a wonderful opportunity to add to our collection. And these stories that individuals can relay and just sort of bring in naturally through our doors. The vast majority of our donations come directly from the families. Sadly, until recently, the veterans themselves would bring the objects in, and that's the thing that's so powerful, to be able to speak to that Marine and their families, for them to share the photos of him, his accomplishments in the war stories. It's really I talk to people when they donate. It's an opportunity to build a time capsule to their loved ones, to their Marines, so that the Marine history is not lost. And our museum sort of serves that purpose in allowing that to be documented and saved for future generations.
The two flags behind you, were they ever in private collection or private hands?
No, thankfully, one of the most important artifacts, of course, in the museum are the Iwo Jima flags. But thankfully, historically, the Marine Corps recognized really quickly that these were above average importance. And despite the occasional phone call or donor email claiming that their relative may have obtained the real one or something humorous along those lines, we know for a fact that the Marine Corps had possession of these. Some of the earliest correspondence from the headquarters Marine Corps showed that these Marine flags were sent to Quantico at an early Marine Corps museum as early as April of 1945. So it was quickly recognized that these flags were of vital importance. In fact, they sent 3 flags back to headquarters Marine Corps and Quantico Marine Corps base. And basically, it's the first flag, the second flag, and the third flag that flew over the division cemetery at the time. So very important artifacts to us, and thankfully the provenance is unquestionable there.
Taking your phone calls as we come up on 9:30 on the East Coast. We have special phone lines in this segment. Marines and family members, 202-748-8002. Otherwise, split up regionally. If you're in the Eastern or Central time zones, 202-748-8000. Mountain and Pacific time zones, 202-748-8001. From Aberdeen, South Dakota, this is Jim.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Doing well, Jim. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. I just want to say you guys are studs. I really love you. I think you're great. I've had a number of uncles that have fought in a number of wars, Korean War, World War II, a number of things. I don't have a whole lot to say because I'm kind of emotional. And I just respect this country so much. I think it's just the best country in the world in history. And, God, I love you guys. The thing is I wanted to say was, well, I just lost my uncle last week, but it's all right. He fought, you know. I never had the chance to fight, but I'd fight for this country. I'll fight for this country.
Jim, thanks for sharing your story, and very sorry for your loss. Mr. Connor, talking about people getting emotional, I wonder what the scene is there, especially in front of the flag, the Iwo Jima flags. Is that something that happens as you watch people go through that exhibit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in our museums, it's entertaining. There's a lot of things in the museum that are designed to sort of captivate people's minds and imagination. But it always inspires me when people come to the World War II gallery. You know, suddenly there's a somber reverence when you actually realize what you're looking at. And, you know, to the caller's, phone call comments about, being an American, I think there's that unifying aspect between the Rosenthal photo and seeing the authenticity of the flag there. It sort of hits people hard. Another aspect of the gallery over your shoulder, if you're looking at the Iwo flag, we have an exhibit that basically has an insignia for each corpsman and Marine that was killed in the battle. And it's a real tangible sort of evidence of the severity of the conflict and the savagery of the fighting. When you can put your hand on each one of these Eagle, Globe, and Anchor ornaments and you realize it's a life that was lost in the battle, it sort of is unifying to us all as Americans. It's a really important thing. But I'm really glad that people do have that reverence for the flag and see that. And like I say, I think that the Rosenthal image really is symbolic of us all as Americans and almost transcends even just the Marine story.
So Bessemer, Alabama, this is Sandy on that line for Marines and family members. Go ahead.
Yes, I was concerned about the Montfort Point Marines. I think my father went out in 1942 to the South Pacific. As a Montfort Point Marines. Were there many all over in Iwo Jima accounted for?
Yep. No,
Yeah.
Mr. Nevgloski.
Absolutely.
Mr. Nevgloski, go ahead.
Oh, not to cut over. No, absolutely. Our African-American Marines, Montfort Point Marines, were definitely represented on Iwo Jima. Their initial duties, they came ashore in the later waves. They provided a lot of logistical support, helped to bring casualties back, pull ammunition, water, and food up to the front lines. But over time, though even the African-American Marines would find themselves thrust into the front and fighting right alongside their white and Hispanic brothers. So absolutely, Montfort Point Marines were represented well during the 36-day battle.
And they're, if I could say a brief moment, they're a very important part of the museum story for our World War II gallery. We recently enhanced certain aspects of the gallery to tell the Montfort Point story, but it's a sort of, Iwo Jima is sort of the culmination of their history, where they are initially, assigned to defense battalions to combat roles and weren't really given the full, support necessarily of our country. But as the war progressed, they were assigned to these ammunition and depot companies, and they weren't intended to be frontline combat troops, but they go from these sort of secondary units to the shores of Iwo Jima and are bloodied in this battle that is the most iconic of the Marine Corps fight. in the war, I think it's pretty amazing, and it's certainly a story that we do document throughout the gallery, and their sort of journey through World War II and journey sort of to become accepted as full Marines and Americans. It's a really important story.
You know, I'll add to that the Marine is going to tell you, especially the Marine that's under fire, that there are no politics, there's no social agenda, there's none of that when the shooting starts. It doesn't matter who the person is to your left and right, and what their skin color is. That will be ingrained in a lot of Marines' minds from that point forward. And Iwo Jima is kind of like that stepping stone. From there, the integration of African American Marines into all-white units, it'll take its roots there in Iwo Jima. And I think that is a significant part of the American story and the American experience.
To El Monte, California, this is David on that line for Marines and family members. Good morning.
Good morning, Semper Fi. Yes, I served with the Navy, Army, and Marines. My wife served for 1 week at Camp Pendleton with educators. We had the honor of having dinner for 1 hour with Woody Williams, the Congressional Medal of Honor winner, at the 100th anniversary of the American Legion. It was in his 80s, and my God, he's like a young guy. My wife wrote an award-winning poem about Woody Williams. And as far as the Marine Corps, my grandmother's stepbrother served at Belleau Wood and Chateau Thierry in World War I. He ended up being stationed in Germany. But Woody Williams is a great American. God bless him, and God bless the Marine Corps. Semper Fi. Thank you.
David, before you go, do you happen to remember any of that poem that your wife wrote about Woody Williams?
Well, not right now, no. But she starts off by saying he's a young guy, and then in part of it she says, and he served his country and never asked why. He did it because that's what everyone is supposed to do, even if they risk their lives. And he was a young guy when he went over there, my God. And we were sitting there, and he actually had the Congressional Medal of Honor with him, and he shared it with us. And he was a guest of honor. We didn't even know that. But when they called him over to present him, he kind of said, I'm not leaving this table yet. I'm not ready. And by the way, I served in Iwo Jima, and I have the right to do what I want to do. He's a crusty guy, but he's a wonderful man. God bless him.
David,
thank you.
Thanks for your phone call. Mr. Nevgloski, if you could, we showed a brief clip of Woody Williams to start this segment, but if you want to tell us the rest of his story.
His story as far as the citation, his Medal of Honor?
Please.
So, he's in a position as an NCO, as a corporal at Iwo Jima, where the last thing you want to do is get held up in a position under enemy fire. Once the enemy pins you down, you have to be able to break the enemy's momentum. And sometimes it takes the actions of one individual Marine. Being his position and his stature as a small unit leader, he knows that pressure is on him. He has got to pick up and move forward, getting his Marines out from underneath that enemy fire. And what he will do is make several very daring decisions and charges at enemy positions, machine gun positions that are encased in concrete that we'll call pillboxes. He'll do that with small arms, with a pistol rifle. He'll do it with a flamethrower. At one point, he's able to reach a pillbox and stick the muzzle of his weapon inside the pillbox while the machine gun is still firing on him. He's also got machine guns that are at different angles, different positions, that can support the one pillbox that he's trying to destroy. His Marines see that, and they immediately think, we can't allow Woody to go out there by himself. And on top of that, he's our leader, and he's setting the example. The follow me kind of idea that Marine Corps NCOs represent. His charge is daring. It's across fire-swept terrain that is also targeted by artillery and mortar fire. And of course, he doesn't have the ability to see 360. He can't see everything that's going on to his left and right, but he certainly can feel the enemy fire that's targeted on him. An absolute amazing, daring act that if there was anything greater than the Medal of Honor, he certainly should be considered for it.
Back to the phone calls. This is Dan out of Falling Waters, West Virginia. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. I would just like to also say that it's a wonderful museum. It's close to Quantico Marine Base, and I've been to Quantico, and in front of Lejeune Hall, there is a plaque dedicated to General Lejeune, and in that the writings of it, Congress wanted to disband the Marine Corps after World War I, and General Lejeune is accredited with saving the Marine Corps so they could fight greater fights later. Thank you. That's just a comment.
Mr. Nevgloski, it seems like a perfect moment for the Marine Corps history chief to jump in here.
Yeah, there's probably at least a dozen times where the Marine Corps as a service, as an organization, is looked at as redundant on the American taxpayer. For example, the Marines are a small force. We are restricted primarily to ships and naval stations throughout the 1700s and 1800s. We will assist the Army in expanded land campaigns. We'll seize islands. We'll do very small Army-like tasks. We'll augment the Army. As we enter World War I, the Marine Corps is already in the process of transitioning from being more or less an augment to the Army and an augment to the Navy to being completely maritime and conducting advanced base force operations, which we'll conduct in World War II. And then World War I happens, and the Marine Corps finds itself ashore, thousands of Marines fighting almost as if it was a second land army. And that'll happen throughout our history. And from the result is that, politicians will question, do we need a second land army? Is there another mission for the Marine Corps? And there are times after World War I, the most obvious was post-World War II, when all the services come together to decide essentially what the Department of Defense is going to look like. And this is really even before the Marines landed at Okinawa. And there is determination amongst the Army and the Navy that the Marine Corps will go away. It'll be absorbed by the other branches. And we will have a collection of very senior decorated Marines that will go before and walk the halls of Congress. They're known as the Chowder Society, to basically put the Marine Corps story out there for the sake of our survival. We will survive. Public law will be written that the Marine Corps will stay a separate branch. It'll have its own mission, and that's what we execute to this day. But the caller is correct. There are a number of times where the Marine Corps is almost absorbed by the other branches.
And this morning on the Washington Journal, focusing on the mission of Iwo Jima on the eve of the 75th anniversary of the beginning of the landings. Mr. Connor, we've been highlighting some of the exhibits that you have on display down there at the National Marine Corps Museum. One of them is a helmet with a pretty incredible amount of damage to it. Can you tell us about that helmet?
Yeah, the helmet is sort of that stark testimony to the savagery of the battle. It was worn in the invasion by a 32-year-old Marine who was drafted into the Marine Corps. His name was Peter Koreski, and he's from Worcester, Massachusetts. He was a member of the 4th Engineer Battalion and was struck by enemy fire on the first day of the battle. Thankfully, if you look at it, you would have concerns, but thankfully he survived. His casualty card notes lacerations, severe lacerations to his head, but he was evacuated from the island shortly after his injuries. And he donated the helmet to us. His family donated the helmet to us, and thankfully he lived to the ripe old age of until 1969, when he eventually had passed away of natural causes. But within our collection, there's numerous helmets and artifacts like that that are sort of sheer testimony to just how awful the invasion was, and those are those kind of things, the mementos that you have. Fairly recently, we took in a collection from a young Marine at the battle who was wounded in the battle, and it still had his pocket contents in the uniform of his dungarees, his utility uniform, and you could still find his cigarettes and his chocolate wrappers and things from when the day he was wounded that were there. And so these are the kind of artifacts that we have here that you sort of just capture those moments in time, and hopefully affect our viewers the way they affect us.
Back to that line for Marines and family members. Larry is in Gallup, New Mexico. Good morning.
Yeah, there, been there?
Go ahead, Larry. You're on.
My name's Yes, good morning. I'm a descendant of the Navajo Code Talker. My father was with 5th Marine Division, 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines at Iwo Jima. And their role was to secure the airfields and send out the code when the flag went up on Mount Suribachi with the 28th Marines, which was involved with Ira Hayes. And the code went like this: the Beh Shata Chen Shash Wilichi Musa King. Yes. That means Suribachi, and then when they say over and out, it says Kahanalu. It says the rabbit went home. So they came in on Red Beach, the second waves with the radios. So I wanted to tell you that. They might have some information there at your museum and your anniversary. Thank you.
Larry, stay on the line for a second. I'll let Mr. Nevgloski jump on. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so the Navajo Code Talkers, our Native American brothers, that were able to, through their dialect, through their language, provide the ability for us to pass information that could not be deciphered by the Japanese intelligence. And what an asset it proved to be. In addition to that, the Native Americans were some of the most fierce fighters. In many ways, that whole Native American philosophy of protecting your ground, standing your ground, fighting for the person to your left and right, meshed so well with being a U.S. Marine. Hats off to the Code Talkers and everything that they brought to the fight.
And Larry, before you go, go ahead, Mr. Connor.
The museum is actually debuting an enhancement to the World War II gallery in the next few months, focused on Navajo Code Talkers, and I think it's one of those undertold stories. It's become cliched to sort of talk about their contributions in the sense that they did this word substitution and things like that. But what our exhibit's going to concentrate on is sort of the code aspect of it, that it is, it's not just something that was sort of, simple rudimentary things, but it's a cryptologic story. I think that sort of has been undertold in the whole World War II Navajo Code Talker narrative, and this is something, it was so wonderful to hear the caller actually speaking in Navajo, to show it, and they're not literal translations of things, they're actually quite fascinating what they were doing from a cryptological standpoint, and we really owe them a lot. It's an amazing story.
And Larry, I was going to ask before you go, do you remember what the code word was for Iwo Jima, and could you speak it?
I don't have the code right now, but I do have Semper Fi.
How do you say that?
Like
Understood.
Semper Fi goes like this: the pe ana na onsa besote ana rabbit. So Suribachi S, sheep, E-I-M, mouse, P, pig, E-I-R, rabbit. Semper Fi.
Larry, thank you so much for calling in this morning. Appreciate that. Kevin's next out of Clearwater, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. My father was with the Navy underwater demolition, frogmen. And he was in on the invasion of Iwo Jima, and he said they were clearing the way for the Marines, and he said it was so stressful because the Marines were right on our butt, and he said, but after we did our job, we had to go in with them, we had to fight. This was an invasion, not a mission, and he just said in the beginning, he said, God, there were guys dropping in front of me, all to the left, to the right, we were being slaughtered. He said, I didn't wonder if I was going to die. I just wondered when. And he said, it took so long to get up to the top, so many days to the, bunkers. And, he said, and when it was all over, he said, for the most part, it was such a bunch of young guys laying on the beach dead. There were so many young guys, and he said, and not was my men and I walked the beach, not one soldier spoke of heroics, and he said, when he came back, you know, he said that's the reason why I never would hardly ever go to the beach with the family, because when I would go to the beach, Iwo Jima would all come back to me. And I said, oh, you know, like it's never really over. He said, well, there's sometimes. But I heard another man who was in on the Battle of Iwo Jima on TV describe it, and he said, I had been in other battles, but for me, Iwo Jima was the worst because it was so narrow, and the enemy was right there, so close to us, that he said it was 26 days of sheer terror for me, you know, and he said at night, Japanese would sneak up, it was so dark, and try to kill some of our soldiers with knives and everything. And anyway, you know, it's so interesting listening to your show because you're hearing different perspectives, because not everybody went through the same experience at Iwo Jima. Some had it so much worse than others, you know. But anyway, thank you. It's very interesting
Kevin,
to hear what you say.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing his story. Mr. Nevgloski, what do you take from that?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. One of the techniques that the Marines had as we come ashore at Iwo Jima is the estimation is that the Marine Corps is going to take casualties to 33% of the force. And we actually almost reached that. So the estimates were pretty good. 31% of the force is wounded or killed, destroyed, equipment destroyed. But as the initial waves go ashore and the casualties start to mount, each landing craft that comes in, the sailors and Marines would throw crates of ammunition into the sand, just scattered about for you know, they're not putting them in any particular location. They're just throwing them out so the Marines can, when they get a chance, come back, break the can open, get a resupply of ammunition, and move back and try to get an inch further. In addition to throwing out cans of ammunition, we start to throw out, or the Marines and sailors start to throw out ponchos. And, you know, the confusion is, what do we need these ponchos for initially? And then Marines start to recognize it's to cover the dead that are littering the beach. And that's a somber thought, and I can only imagine being a survivor of Iwo Jima if I went back to see that beach and remembering what it looked like 75 years earlier. That would be amazing. But the gentleman, the caller, talking about his relative doing the underwater demolitions, clearing away, make no bones about it. We had been bombing Iwo Jima from the air for 77 days prior to the 19th of February. Then we, through naval bombardment, for 3 days prior to the landing. You know, the element of surprise is gone. The Japanese know we're coming 77 days before it happens. So a lot of the obstacles they put out under the water, there's very few, but there's enough to get the Marines to believe that, okay, this is going to be a defended beach. Really, the obstacles are about, you know, 100 yards inland, and that is the volcanic ash, the large hump that the Marines have to go over. And when they finally go over, after about an hour of being on the beach, they break a certain defense line, and the Japanese start to engage them. So the initial entry onto the beach is not bad at all. It's about an hour later when we hit that high ground of the volcanic ash berm, that's when we trigger the Japanese defenses.
About 10 minutes left in our program this morning from the National Marine Corps Museum down in Quantico, Virginia. A tweet as we've been having this conversation from MLB, who writes in this morning that I get to Washington, D.C. at least every other year. I normally spend a week there, but no matter how many times I go, there's one monument that gives me the chills and a smile. It's the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. It's magnificent, and it's the actions of our finest. Mr. Connor, can you talk about the history of that memorial in Arlington, and how many survivors of Iwo Jima were there, do you know, when it was dedicated?
I know it sort of falls outside of my scope of what we do as we concentrate on the museum here itself. But what I can say about the Weldon sculpture and just the iconography of the actual flag raising, it's something important is that the flag has a journey, a story, whether it's through the sculpture that we see in Arlington or whether it's what you see here displayed at the museum. Other than it being this media moment, I always talk about its journey to us and how it got to the museum. And one of the more fascinating stories was it becomes the symbol of the 7th War Bond Tour. It's the last war bond tour of the war, and it becomes sort of the main visual image that's used for it. That war bond tour raises more money for the cause than all the other war bond tours prior to it. And I think that's amazing if you think about it. As Americans, we're paying for a war as it occurs. And even by 1945, while wages were increasing and folks were more worried about their improvements after the war, these men are still fighting, that they're still conscious, and this flag image and the emotion of it could still inspire people to think for their country so much more greatly. The flag continues its journey. There's eventually, even after the war, there's a freedom train that carries an original version of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Iwo Jima flag. It travels the country to inspire Americans. This renewed sense of patriotism is like 1949 that we're still, bringing back these memories and the iconography of the flag. So it's really an important, visual. The symbol in Arlington is just one of those tangible forms of the power of the Iwo Jima flag raising and what it means to us as Americans.
Jane is next out of Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning. I was wondering how long after the invasion of Iwo did they invade Okinawa? My father, I have an article from the paper, my father was one of the first 2 men on Okinawa, and he was 28 years old. But what I wondered whether there was more casualties on Iwo or was there more on Okinawa. I know there was a lot of casualties. Also, I remember my dad came back and we were never told to get out of bed. We were always told to hit the deck, and we were never called in for supper. We were always said chow down. So there was a lot of different lingo from the Marine Corps that we absorbed as kids.
Jane.
And he was very proud. And my brother also served, and he was on Okinawa. Peace out.
Jane, thanks so much for the call. Mr. Nevgloski.
Yeah, so post Iwo Jima, several months later, we'll start to focus, and we've already been focusing on Okinawa as the next step in that if the island hopping campaign that the Marines are executing. Okinawa will be much, much more complex. Of course, as an island, it's much larger than Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima, is only 8 square miles. Okinawa, 4 or 5 times that. You're also definitely encroaching upon, you're no longer in the Japanese front yard when at Okinawa. You're in their living room. Okay, you're actually cracking into their living room. And we have to understand Okinawa is also going to be the pinnacle where we establish and bring all of our combat power. Remember I talked earlier about the logistics mindset of the Pacific Theater. All of that combat power is going to make its way from the different islands past Iwo Jima to Okinawa. That is the stepping stone for mainland Japan. So you're going to have several hundred, 100,000+ troops land at Okinawa. You're going to have twice the number of casualties. You're going to have a lot of civilian casualties as well. All the islands previous to Okinawa are going to be uninhabited. Other than Japanese, the only people you're going to find there are maybe Korean laborers that were building the fortresses. You might find the island inhabitants, but very small in numbers. Okinawa, you're going to have true Japanese citizens there. So the complexity of Okinawa, months later, it is extremely significant to understand what Okinawa meant compared to what Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima is yet another stepping stone to get to Okinawa. Okinawa is the pinnacle to get to mainland Japan.
Time for just maybe 1 or 2 more phone calls this morning. Our live show this morning from the National Museum of the Marine Corps. This is Jeff out of Merrimack, New Hampshire. Excuse me. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you for picking up the call today, C-SPAN. So I had 2 quick things. First, I just want to thank all the past, present, and future service members. We have so much in this country because of you people. And I'm trying to look the gentleman in the with the red tie, but because of the delay, I can't look you in the eye and say it. But thank you, and thank everybody else that gives us that. And second, I think this would go to the gentleman with the red tie. My mother-in-law, who passed away a number of years back now, her last name was Gagnon. She was related to Rennie Gagnon. So my wife is second cousins with Rennie Gagnon. The home I live in, he used to frequent regularly back in the 70s, and my wife remembers him coming to the house when she was a kid. And they make no big deal of it, no big deal. And when she was a kid, they made no big deal of it when he came here. It was just amazing to me that my wife's side of the family, they make no big deal of that they're related to that hero. And that was about all I had to say. And thank you to all the veterans.
Mr. Nevgloski, can you fill us in a little bit on who he was?
Yeah, so thank you, and thank you for being an American citizen worth fighting for. Rennie Gagnon is a Marine that is involved in the Iwo Jima operations. He is there for the first flag raising, and then he will go. He's identified as an early flag raiser. He will go back to the United States as part of the 7th Bond Drive. He'll become a face that is known, and a name that is known for years, dealing with the flag raising. And he's been, highlighted in a couple movies. He's just another Marine, and I think that's what the caller is talking about. There are so many dedicated Americans that will fight and survive, fight and die on Iwo Jima, but every one of them, to a man, are just your average red blood American boys that went overseas to stop fascism, to stop the evil that was occurring. And a lot of them will come home and never tell their family members not only what they experienced as an individual, but what they were part of. They just went, they did their job, they came home, and they dedicated the rest of their lives to being the best person, the best American they could be. And they were living their lives for the guys who did not come home. And Rennie is one of them. Not a big deal. He served on Iwo Jima. He wouldn't want anyone to give him accolades. He just wanted to be known as someone, along with several thousand more just like him, that just went and did their job. And that speaks a lot to his character.
And it seems like a good story to end on this morning. Edward Nevgloski, Marine Corps History Chief, Owen Connor, World War II Gallery Curator there at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. We do appreciate your time, and we appreciate the museum inviting us in this morning.
Thank you.
And if you missed any of this morning's program from the National Museum of the Marine Corps, or if you want to watch it again, we're replaying it tonight on our companion network on C-SPAN 3. It'll be part of a primetime lineup featuring programs all about the Marine Corps. It starts at 8 p.m. Eastern. And Museum Week here on the Washington Journal and American History TV continues tomorrow when we visit the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. We'll mark the centennial of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote. Our guest will be Anthea Harding, the museum's first female director since it opened in 1964. That's live tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern, right here on C-SPAN.
I'll look now at some of our live coverage today on the